Picture a penny, just a single copper penny, worn smooth on one side from 1,000 different hands. Now picture what you could buy with that penny in London, 1855, a cup of coffee, a handful of walnuts, a printed sheet of news that's already 2 days old, or a meat pie. Hot, crimped at the edges, leaking steam through a small hole in the top. Wrapped in a square of newspaper that immediately turns translucent with grease, the smell of it hitting you before the pie man even opens his basket lid. Meat and gravy and pastry, everything you need to get through another afternoon when your last proper meal was yesterday morning. Here is the thing about that pie that every person in London knows, and that nobody in London ever says out loud. Nobody asks what's in it. Not really, not seriously, not in a way where they actually want to hear the answer. Because somewhere in the back of every Londoner's head, underneath the hunger and the cold and the very reasonable price of 1 penny, there is a quiet and persistent understanding that the meat in a penny pie has not had a good life, has possibly not had any life worth mentioning, has arrived in that basement kitchen through channels that polite conversation cannot follow. And still, every day, 200,000 people in this city buy penny pies and eat them standing up on street corners, licking the grease off their fingers, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether they can afford a second one. Tonight, we're going to find out where those pies come from. Not from the front, not from the pie man with his cheerful cry and his steaming basket. From the bottom, from the beginning, from the place where the penny pie is born, in a basement below street level, at 2 a.m, by the light of a single tallow candle, where a 15-year-old boy is standing at a wooden table with his hands covered in something that used to be alive. His name is Thomas Briggs. Everyone calls him Tom. He arrived in London 3 months ago from a village in Shropshire, with 17 shillings, a change of clothes, and a letter of introduction that got him exactly nowhere. He ended up here, and here is not a good place. But he's learning things that the rest of London would rather not know. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I'm never quite sure whether you drift off peacefully, or whether you're lying there in the dark thinking about what exactly was in that pasty you had for lunch. Either way, get comfortable, get settled. Here we go. Your hands are grey, not dirt grey, not coal grey, the grey of boiled meat, the grey of the water that meat has been sitting in for 6 hours in a pot so old the iron has started to flake into the broth. You've been working for 4 hours. It's not yet 2 a.m. The kitchen is below street level. 6 steps down from the back alley behind Skinner's Lane, Bermondsey, which means the window, such as it is, shows you nothing but the bottom edge of a wall and the occasional boot heel of someone passing above. This ceiling is low enough that Mr. Dent, who's not a tall man, has to duck when he moves between the ovens and the chopping table. You don't have to duck. Not yet. You're 15 and still growing, which Mr. Dent views as a personal inconvenience. The room measures roughly 12 feet by 18. You've paced it. At 2 a.m, when the oven heat has built up and the steam from the boiling pots hangs in the air like fog, it feels even smaller. 3 ovens along one wall, clay, bricked in, fired with coal that comes down through a chute from street level twice a week. The coal costs money. Mr. Dent thinks about this constantly. One long wooden table, 8 feet across, its surface stained so deeply with grease and old meat that no amount of scrubbing has ever reached the original wood. You scrub it every night. The darkness remains. 2 pots on the largest oven, one for broth, one for the pastry water, kept just below boiling to keep the lard workable, and the meat. The meat is in a barrel in the corner. You don't think about the barrel too carefully. Mr. Dent's instructions on this point are very clear. You take what you need from the barrel, you chop it fine on the block, you season it with salt and pepper and the brownish liquid from the smaller bottle, and you move on. You do not ask about the barrel, you do not look too long at what comes out of it. You do not speculate out loud about where it was. Before it was here, you chop, you mix, you fill. The pastry comes from a separate operation. Lard worked into flour with your hands until it has the right texture, which is somewhere between leather and grey cloud, then flattened with a rolling pin that has seen better decades and formed into circles, filled with the meat mixture, sealed at the edges with a crimping motion your fingers now perform without your brain being involved, and placed in rows on the iron sheets that go into the ovens. 24 pies per sheet, 4 sheets per oven, 3 ovens. In one night, you and Mr. Dent and the other boy, a silent 12-year-old named Albert who has not said more than 8 words to you since you arrived, and who may have been here so long he has forgotten language, produce somewhere between 200 and 300 pies. Those pies will be on the street by 5 in the morning, sold from baskets and from Mr. Dent's barrow on the corner of Tooley Street by 7 and gone by noon, and then you start again. The tallow candle on the shelf above your head has been burning since 10. The wax has run down into a small frozen river on the shelf edge. The light it throws is yellow and weak and makes everything look slightly worse than it probably is. Probably. The smell in this kitchen is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't been in it. There's the hot, fat smell of pastry cooking, which is actually quite good. Warm and a little sweet. The smell that, if you were walking past a baker's window on a cold morning, would make your mouth water. There's the coal smoke from the ovens, which you've stopped noticing almost entirely, the way you stop noticing a sound that never changes. There's the steam from the pots, the broth smell, which is meat smell but boiled, reduced, concentrated into something that sits in the back of your throat, even when you're not eating. And then there's the smell underneath all of that. The smell that was here when you arrived, and that Mr. Dent swore you'd stop noticing within a fortnight. He was wrong. It's the smell of old animal, old fat. The slightly off, slightly sweet undertone that you now know is what happens when meat has been kept just long enough to be questionable, but not long enough to be obviously refused. There's a word for it that the men at the market use. High. The meat is high, not rotten, not yet. But moving in that direction with a kind of cheerful determination, like a man walking confidently toward a cliff he hasn't quite seen yet. High meat costs less. High meat makes penny pies possible. Without high meat, the penny pie doesn't exist. You're thinking about this, hands moving automatically through the crimping motion, placing pie after pie onto the iron sheet, when you hear Mr. Dent on the stairs. One heavy footstep, then another, the particular creak of the 4th step that always announces him like a bell. You move faster. Ezekiel Dent is 53 years old. He's built like a barrel that has been left out in the rain for several years and has started to lean slightly to the left. His hands are enormous, red and rough, and permanently shining with a kind of deep-set grease that doesn't come out with washing, that has worked its way into the line of his palms and the crevices of his knuckles like dye into cloth. His face is a record of his profession, florid in the cheeks from the constant oven heat, heavy under the eyes from the hours. His nose has been broken at some point and sits slightly off-centre, which gives him an expression of permanent mild scepticism. He's been making pies for 30 years. He knows things about meat that would end your appetite permanently if you heard them all at once. You've been learning them gradually instead, which is probably more merciful. "How's the barrel?" he asks, not looking at you, moving straight to the nearest oven and pulling the door open to check the heat. "Getting low." "Good. Means we shift what we have before it turns." The way he says turns, without any particular weight or concern, the way a farmer might say it about weather. "Will you go to Sharp's in the morning?" "Sharp's is the dead meat market on Newgate Street. We'll get there." "Yes, sir. Early, before the other pie men get there. Tell him it's for Dent. He knows." He knows. You want to ask what exactly Sharp knows and what arrangement exists between Hezekiah Dent and Sharp's establishment, and what specifically comes from Sharp's that ends up in the barrel that you've been chopping for the past 4 hours. You don't ask. You have learned not to ask. The first week you asked. You asked about the brownish liquid in the small bottle that Mr. Dent adds to every batch of meat mixture. He told you it was gravy concentrate. This is technically true in the same way that it's technically true that a puddle is water. You asked about the piece of meat you found with what appeared to be fur still attached to one edge. Grey-brown fur about an inch long. Mr. Dent took it from you without looking at it, trimmed the edge with one practice cut and returned the rest to the barrel. "Careless dressing," he said. "Happens." You asked once about the smell. He told you to get back to work. 3 months later, you have stopped asking. You have become, in the way that all people become, someone who can know a thing without quite looking at it directly, who can hold an unexamined truth in the peripheral vision of the mind and never bring it fully into focus. This is how London works. This is how everyone in London works. The men who build the railways don't think too carefully about the men dying in the tunnels. The ladies in Mayfair don't think about the women in the laundries who wash their linen with hands boiled red. The people eating penny pies on street corners don't think about the basement on Skinner's Lane. You're not sure if this makes you feel better or worse. What you know, without quite knowing, is this. The meat in Mr. Dent's pies comes from several sources, most of which are not the respectable butchers' shops on the main streets. Some of it comes from Sharp's. Some of it comes from a man named Collins, who arrives twice a week at midnight with a cart and a canvas, covering the back in a manner that discourages questions. Some of it, you think, you suspect, you try not to confirm, comes from even further down the supply chain than that. There is, in London, 1855, an entire economy operating just below the surface of the visible meat trade. Horses that have died in the street, collected by the knackers. Cattle that have failed the market inspection, turned away for being too diseased to sell to respectable butchers, acquired by other parties for significantly less. Animals that have died of what the traders call natural causes and what the Board of Health, when it bothers to look, tends to call something else entirely. Cats. People have told you about cats, the ones who work the market stalls. They call it London Rabbit. They say this with straight faces. They've been saying it with straight faces for 30 years. It has become, in the way of all repeated lies, almost true in the telling. Or they are half serious, which is worse. A penny pie is a marvel of Victorian economics. It must contain enough meat to be recognisable as a pie. It must be hot because hot makes everything better. It must be tasty enough to be bought again, because there are other pie men on the same corner, and it must cost exactly 1 penny, because the people buying it don't have more than 1 penny, and if they did, they'd use it for something else. the margin for everything else, ingredients, coal, your wage, Mr. Dent's profit, the rent on the premises, all of that has to come out of the difference between what he pays for his ingredients and 1 penny. The ingredient price, therefore, has to be almost nothing. And almost nothing in this city at this time is what you're standing over right now at 2 in the morning with your grey hands and the barrel in the corner and the smell that you've stopped mentioning because mentioning it changes nothing. You place the last pie on the sheet, slide it into the oven, close the iron door. The warmth hits your face. For one moment, just the warmth, it's almost pleasant. At 4:15 in the morning, Mr. Dent hands you a canvas sack and 3 shillings and tells you to be at Sharp's by 5 and back by 6:30. The street outside is dark. In October, in London, in 1855, it's always dark at 4:15 in the morning. The gas lamps have been burning all night, their yellow light making small orange circles on the wet cobblestones. The fog has come in off the river, the thick sulphurous kind that sits at chest height and makes you feel like you're wading through something. It smells of coal smoke, mud, the sharp chemical undertone of the gasworks at Bermondsey, and beneath all of that, always, the river, low tide, the exposed mudflats giving up their held smells into the cold air. Rot and salt and something biological that you can't quite name, but that your body recognises as a warning. London at 4 in the morning is a different city than London at noon. The streets aren't empty, not exactly, but they're different. The daytime people haven't started yet, and the nighttime people are finishing. A man is pushing a cart loaded with something heavy and covered with sacking. He doesn't look at you. You don't look at him. 2 women at the end of the street, walking quickly, arms linked, vanishing around a corner before you can quite see their faces clearly. A dog, enormous, black, moving along the gutter with a focused professional interest that suggests he's been doing this all night and has learned which streets are worth investigating. He's not wrong. There are things in this gutter worth investigating if you're a dog. You walk quickly. The Bermondsey streets are narrow enough that the buildings on either side almost touch overhead, and the fog catches in the gap and doesn't move. You pass a gin shop. It's closed, or mostly closed. There's no light in the window, but the smell coming from under the door is unmistakable. Sweet and chemical and slightly burned. At a junction, you have to step around a man asleep in the doorway of a chandler's shop, or possibly not asleep. You don't check. This is another thing you've learned not to check. The walk to Newgate Street takes 40 minutes at the pace you set, moving northwest through streets that gradually, block by block, shift from Bermondsey dark to the slightly less dark of the city closer to its own centre. By the time you reach Smithfield, the sky is beginning to lighten at the edges, not sunrise yet. The particular shade of dark that precedes it, when the black goes blue and the shadows separate from the things that made them, and even from 2 streets away you can smell Smithfield. Let me tell you about Smithfield. Smithfield Market, the central meat market of London, occupying several acres just outside the old city walls, has been a place where animals are sold, slaughtered and processed since at least the 12th century. In 1855, the live cattle market has just been moved to Islington, a reform the reformers celebrated and the meat trade mostly ignored. But the slaughterhouse activity remains, the butchers remain, the wholesale meat trade remains, and on the fringes of the respectable market. in the streets and yards and covered passages around it, operates the other market, the one that doesn't have a name on any official record, the one where the meat goes that can't go anywhere else. You could call it the dead meat market, which is what the people who work it call it themselves. Though all market meat is dead meat, so the name tells you more by what it implies than by what it says. The dead meat market is where meat goes when something has gone wrong with it. When an animal has died before the slaughterman could get to it, and the owner still wants to recover something for the carcass. When the Board of Health Inspector has turned away a delivery at the respectable market because of contamination or disease or a smell he didn't like. When a butcher has taken on more stock than he can sell fresh and needs to move it at whatever price he can get before it moves itself. The people who buy from the dead meat market are the pie men, the sausage makers, the pressed meat factories, and the establishments that produce the kind of tinned provisions sold to working families under labels that don't specify origin. The people who sell to it are the knackers, the unlicensed collectors, the men who travel the streets with covered carts at 3 a.m, recovering assets. Sharps isn't a shop, it's a yard. Tucked between a tallow chandler and a building that appears to have no current function, the yard is accessed through a gate that's usually open, because locking it would imply there was something in there worth protecting. The smell reaches you before the gate does. Hot offal, cold fat, the particular sweet-rotting smell of meat in various states of freshness being stored together in a space with insufficient drainage. And underneath it, the chemical sharpness of the saltpetre and the pickle brine that's used to extend the useful life of things that have already had enough life for anyone's purposes. You breathe through your mouth. It doesn't help as much as you'd hope. The yard at 5 a.m. is active. 3 other buyers are already there. You recognise one of them, a large woman named Mrs. Croft, who runs 3 pie barrows in Southwark, and who arrives everywhere first and leaves everywhere last, and has the disposition of someone who has outlasted every inconvenience ever put in her path. She glances at you. "Dent's boy?" "Yes, ma'am." She nods and turns back to the man she's been talking to. The man is Sharp's foreman, a narrow-faced individual named Jessie, whose job appears to be to stand between the buyers and the stock and prevent anyone from examining anything too carefully before the money changes hands. You wait your turn. The cold is getting into your feet through the soles of your boots, which have a crack in the left heel that you've been meaning to address for 6 weeks. When Jessie gets to you, he says, "Dent," and you say yes, and he disappears into the covered portion of the yard and comes back carrying a wooden box about 2 feet by 1 foot, heavy, wrapped in canvas, tied with string. 3 and 6pence, he says. "Mr. Dent gave you 3 shillings. 3 shillings, you say. Jessie looks at you. The expression on his face is not exactly hostile. It's more like the expression of a man who has done this same negotiation 800 times and finds it tedious but not particularly difficult. 3pence more than that, he says. "Mr. Dent's standing order is 3 shillings. "Mr. Dent's standing order was 3 shillings until last week when the price of the stock changed." "Has it?" "Has it what?" "Changed. The stock." Jessie looks at you for a long moment. You look back at him. Your hands are in your coat pockets. The box is on the ground between you. "The box is 3 shillings, Jessie says eventually. "But you need the extra, the fixings. That's the other 6pence. You don't know what the fixings are, but you strongly suspect that without them, Mr. Dent will have words with you about having come back without them." "I have exactly 3 shillings, you say." which is what Mr. Dent sent me with. A pause. Jessie sighs. The sigh of a man who recognises that he's dealing with someone who cannot technically pay more than he has. Tell Dent we need to talk about the pricing, he says. I'll tell him. Jessie adds something to the box, something wrapped in paper. He ties the canvas back. 3 shillings. You hand him the coins. He pockets them with the practised ease of someone who handles other people's money all day and has made his peace with it. You pick up the box. It's heavy. The weight shifts as you lift it, telling you that what's inside is loose, probably chopped, probably partially frozen. The canvas is cold under your hands. You don't open it. You don't look at it. You walk back towards Skinner's Lane with the box against your chest, breathing through your mouth, watching your boots on the wet cobblestones. You're a mile from the market when you stop, set the box down on the step of a closed shop, and look at it. The canvas is damp. In 2 places where the contents have shifted against the fabric, there are faint darker marks. Not blood exactly. The colour of blood at several removes. The colour of water that blood passed through a long time ago. You look at it for almost a minute. Then you pick it up, hitch it under your arm and keep walking. The sky's lightening properly now. First grey, then a thin cold yellow at the edges of the rooftops. Somewhere behind you, a church bell strikes 5:30. An hour to get back. An hour to process what's in the box into the barrel. Then the ovens need refuelling, the second batch needs crimping, and Mr. Dent will be checking progress at 7 with the expression of a man who has never once in his life been satisfied with the rate of other people's work. You walk faster. Your left boot squelches faintly with every step where the crack in the heel lets the wet in. Your hands are cold. Your feet are colder. Above you, London is waking up. Back at Skinner's Lane, you set the box on the preparation table and look at it for the second time this morning. Albert is at the ovens feeding coal, not looking at you. He never looks at anything directly. After 2 months of working beside him, you have started to find this quality not eerie but somehow sensible. He has found a way to be present in this room without quite being here. It seems functional. You untie the canvas. Inside the box is meat, obviously. It's always meat. That's what you're here to buy. The question of what kind of meat, the question you have gotten better and better at not asking, sits in the corner of your mind like a persistent noise you've chosen to classify as background. The meat is pale, paler than beef, paler than pork, cut into rough pieces, varying sizes, some with a small rim of fat along one edge. White fat, quite fine, not horse. You've started to learn the differences in texture and colour from the various sources. Horse is darker, coarser grain. This is finer. There's also the fixings that Jessie added at the last moment. These, when you unwrap the paper, turn out to be a quantity of what appears to be crumbled brown material, partially dried. You lift the paper to your nose. Bread. Old bread, dried and crumbled. A bulking agent. In the bottom of the paper, mixed in with the bread, is something darker. Dried herbs, probably. You think you can identify something that might be thyme and something else. A sharper smell, chemical, slightly medicinal. You don't know what this is. You will find out eventually that it's dried cayenne pepper and something else. Something the market brokers add as a matter of standard practice to the composite products they sell to the pie trade. Something that makes the flavour interesting enough that the buyer doesn't think too hard about what they're tasting. But right now, you fold the paper back over the fixings, set them aside and begin processing the pale meat. Chopping block. heavy knife, arm moving in the rhythm that your shoulder now knows without being told. The pale meat on the block, chunk by chunk working from the back of the box to the front, and then you stop, about 2/3 through the box. The piece of meat in your hand is larger than the others, about the size of your palm, and one edge of it has a quality that the others didn't. You look at it for 3 seconds that feel much longer. Bones, small bones, the kind of articulated structure you associate with. You set the piece down, you pick up the knife, you chop. You don't stop again until the box is empty. Albert has not looked at you once during this entire process. The ovens are going well, the coal is red and even. The kitchen is warmer than it was an hour ago, and the smell is building. That particular layered smell that will live in your clothes and your hair until Sunday, when Mrs. Dent gives you a half bucket of hot water and a scrap of soap. You add the meat to the pot, you add the fixings, you add the brownish liquid from the small bottle, you stir. The heat reaches the back of your hands as you stir, and it's almost pleasant. The warmth after the cold walk. The steam rises, the smell shifts, cooks, becomes something that at a distance from the right angle is actually not unlike the smell of a real broth. Not unlike. The pies, when they come out of the oven, look correct. Brown pastry, crimped edges, small steam hole in the top. They look in fact exactly like what they're supposed to be. At 6:30, Mr. Dent comes down the stairs. He looks at the trays. He lifts the lid on the pot. He dips a spoon, tastes, nods. Good. Load the barrow. Loading the barrow means carrying the trays up the 6 steps from the kitchen, through the back alley, around to the front of the building where Mr. Dent's barrow is waiting under a tarpaulin. The barrow is insulated with old sacking and fitted with a central compartment that holds a small pan of heated water to keep the pies from cooling too fast. 140 pies this morning, in rows in the barrow like soldiers waiting for orders. Also separately a basket. This is your assignment. You carry the basket to the corner of Tooley Street, outside the boot mender's shop, and stand there from 7 until the basket is empty, or until noon, whichever comes first. The basket is your territory. Mr. Dent has the barrow. The barrow gets the foot traffic from the commercial streets. Your basket gets the workers from the tanneries and the leather dressers and the small manufactories along the riverside. Men walk into work with pennies they can afford to spend. You've done this every morning for 3 months. By now, you know the faces. The tall man who always wants to and always hands over the coins before you finished wrapping the first one. The woman with the red shawl who comes every other day exactly, who haggles for no reason because the price is already fixed, and who buys the pie anyway once the haggling is complete. The group of boys, younger than you, who pool their coins for 1 pie and pass it between them in fractions, watching it diminish with the focused attention of small people for whom food is not casual. You know their faces, but you don't know their names, and they don't know yours. You're the pie boy. That's a category, not a person. Pies, hot pies, meat pies, a penny. Your voice has gotten louder in 3 months. The city requires volume. The first week you nearly whispered it, standing on the corner with your basket, embarrassed by the sound of your own selling, while the street noise swallowed you completely and not one person turned to look. Now you project. You learned it from listening to the street sellers around you, the coffee vendors and the crossing sweepers and the men with bags of watercress. The way sound carries in this street, which directions, how to pitch your voice to cut through the particular register of horses and wheels. The first customer arrives at 7:12. A man in a workman's coat, hands already dirty though the morning's barely started. He drops his penny into your palm with the precision of someone who has done this exact transaction many times. You hand him the pie. It's still warm from the basket. The pastry is golden. The steam curls up from the hole in the top. The smell, from here, from this angle, without the context of the kitchen, is actually good. Hot pastry and savoury filling. He eats it in 3 bites, standing right there in front of you, and walks away without looking back. This is what it feels like to sell something you know about and choose not to say. The guilt, such as it is not dramatic. It doesn't live in your chest. It lives more in the small space between what you're doing and what you're thinking while you're doing it. The fraction of a second gap between handing over the pie and taking the penny, in which the thing you know sits perfectly still and looks at you, and then it passes, and another customer, and another penny, and another pie. By 9 o'clock, a man in a coat that suggests a degree of professional formality is standing across the street watching your basket. He's been there for about 15 minutes. You've noticed him the way you notice most things now, in the peripheral way, without looking directly, without changing your behaviour. He's writing something in a small notebook. His name, as it turns out, is Mr. Gareth Fosse. He works for the Society for the Inspection of Adulterated Food, established 2 years ago by a group of physicians and reformers who had grown tired of watching people eat things that were not what they were sold as. You don't know any of this yet, you find it out later, in pieces, from things Mr. Dent says, and from the conversation you overhear through the kitchen ceiling, thin floor, no insulation, when Mr. Fosse comes into the shop at 9:30. He's polite. His voice comes through the floor as a steady murmur, with Mr. Dent's voice occasionally rising above it. Standard practice across the trade. Samples for analysis. Every shop on this street, not just yourself. You and Albert look at each other. This is the most sustained eye contact you've had with Albert in 3 months. What does he want? Albert asks. It's a full sentence. Albert doesn't usually do full sentences. Samples, you say. Of what? You both look at the barrel. Then Albert goes back to the ovens and you go back to the crimping, and neither of you says anything else. The sound of Mr. Fosse leaving comes as a change in the quality of the noise above you. A door, a bell. And then Mr. Dent's footstep, heavier than usual on the stairs. He stands in the kitchen doorway for a moment, hands in his apron, looking at neither of you in particular. Government man, he says finally, came about the adulteration business. He says adulteration the way people say a word they've been hearing from outside and haven't yet absorbed as their own. He took samples, he continues, of the gravy and of the... He stops. Of several things. A pause. We'll hear nothing more of it, he says. There's a dozen shops between here and Southwark in the same situation, and they don't have the manpower to chase all of them. Just another pause. Keep your heads down. He goes back upstairs. You go back to crimping. The barrel in the corner doesn't look different than it did 10 minutes ago. It smells the same. The contents haven't changed. The only difference is that now someone outside this kitchen knows it exists. Mr. Fosse's notebook. Whatever he wrote in it is now a document in the world. A small, permanent fact with your workplace's address attached to it. For the first time, you think about what it would mean if the inspection found what you suspect it would find. Not for Mr. Dent. for you. You're 15. You've been here 3 months. You hold the knife. You carry the box from Sharps. You stand on the corner and sell 140 pies a day to people who trust that the hot smell and the golden pastry mean something it actually doesn't. Would the magistrate care about 15 years old and 3 months and no alternative options? You don't know. You crimp another pie, place it on the tray, move on. After Mr. Fossey's visit, you start paying attention differently. Not to everything. You don't have the mental capacity to pay full attention to everything, not after 4 hours of sleep and 6 hours of kitchen work and 4 hours of street selling. The mind has a budget, and you've been spending most of yours on survival and not enough on the details underneath. But you start paying attention to the barrel, not dramatically, not in a way that Mr. Dent would notice. Just, you start looking, and you start asking cautiously at the market. Not at Sharps, not directly, but the other markets, the ones you pass on the way, the ones where the regular butchers sell off their oddments in the late morning. There are people who'll talk if you don't push them, and if you frame your questions as idle curiosity rather than genuine investigation. What you learn is a taxonomy, a classification system for London's meat trade that nobody writes down. At the top, the prime butchers, Mayfair, Belgravia, the area around Covent Garden. Their stock comes from farms with names, farmers with reputations. The meat is inspected, properly slaughtered, hung for the correct period. It costs £1 or more per pound. Below that, the respectable mid-range. The shops that serve the middle classes. Still good quality, but the sourcing is less careful. The margin is tighter. Below that, the cheap butchers of the working class neighbourhoods. The ones on the corners of Bermondsey, Whitechapel, Southwark. They source from the wholesale markets. They buy what they can afford, and what they can afford is frequently not what they choose, if price were no object. And then below that, the dead meat trade is not quite a secret. It's more like a shared fiction. Everyone in the trade knows it exists. Everyone adjacent to the trade has a sense of it. The reformers have been writing about it in pamphlets for 20 years. But in 1855, there is no Food Adulteration Act. The legislation that will make this properly illegal, with teeth, is still 5 years away. And even after it passes, enforcement will be patchy for decades. Right now, the most accurate description of what Mr. Dent does is, technically nothing prohibits it. Several things suggest it's wrong, and the people buying penny pies on Tooley Street have decided not to investigate. The categories of meat that come into Mr. Dent's barrel, as best as you can reconstruct them: condemned cattle, animals that have failed the market inspector's check at Smithfield for signs of disease or poor condition, technically supposed to be destroyed. In practice, often acquired cheaply by brokers who sell them onto the trade at a level below the respectable market. Knackers meat, animals that have died or been killed as unfit for other purposes, horses, old dairy cattle, animals that lived their productive lives and arrived at the end of them and were still worth something to someone who wasn't asking too many questions, and the other categories. London in 1855 has a serious animal problem. It has a serious problem with the animals it considers domestic, and the fact that these animals eventually die, often in large numbers, and must go somewhere. Dead cats collected by the night soil men alongside other waste, sometimes finding their way to other destinations. Strays. The animals of neighbourhoods so poor that when a dog or a cat died, it was not immediately discarded, because even a dead animal represented something recoverable. The men in the market call the pale, fine-grained meat country rabbit. They say this with straight faces. They have been saying it with straight faces for 30 years. It has become, in the way of all repeated lies, almost true in the telling. You think about the small bones in the box from Sharps. You think about the piece you stopped at, set down, picked up the knife, country rabbit. You've eaten real rabbit, back in Shropshire. You know what rabbit tastes like, what its bones look like, how the joints sit. Country rabbit. You go back to the barrel and you crimp and you fill and you heat and you sell. Because here is the truth they don't teach you. The truth you're learning faster than almost anything else about this city. There is a significant difference between knowing something and being in a position to act on what you know. In the second month, Mr. Dent introduces you to the full range of additives, not as a confession, more as a practical lesson. He stands at the preparation table one afternoon, a slow afternoon, no morning rush, just the secondary batch, and shows you the shelf above the second oven, where a collection of bottles, jars and paper packets are arranged with the orderliness of a small laboratory. These, he says, are what make the difference between a pie that sells and a pie that doesn't. The brownish liquid is, he explains, a beef extract, or rather, something sold as beef extract. It comes in a bottle with a label showing a bull and some text that is just faded enough that most of the words are difficult to make out. What it adds to the meat mixture is colour and depth of flavour. It makes the interior of the pie look convincingly like something that has been cooked in meat juices rather than assembled from components that arrived separately. Colour and smell, Mr. Dent says. That's what people buy. Not the meat, not really. They buy the colour and the smell of the gravy, and if those are right, they eat it without thinking. There's salt, obviously. Salt suppresses some of the off notes, draws out moisture that affects texture, and has been used for thousands of years to render questionable meat more palatable. There's pepper, black and white, the white used more liberally because it's cheaper and because its sharpness masks other flavours. The cayenne you already knew about, a chemical heat at the back of the throat that keeps the eater's attention occupied with the present sensation rather than the underlying question. And there's the water. In the bottom layer, under the meat mixture, a thin layer of thickened gravy. Thickened with flour and with the boiled down liquid from the broth pot, which has been simmering all night and has accumulated a gelatinous quality that, when the pie is hot, flows as liquid, and when it cools, sets firm. The gravy is the art. The gravy is what makes the pie feel substantial. What fills the space between the meat pieces as makes the buyer feel they've received full measure. A well-constructed gravy from the broth pot can multiply the apparent quantity of meat by a significant factor. The gravy, Mr. Dent says, with something as close to aesthetic pride as you've seen him come, should never set until it's past the teeth. He means it should be liquid when eaten hot, which means it's eaten too quickly to be examined. You listen to all of this. You nod at appropriate intervals. Somewhere in the back of your mind you're cataloguing it. Not for any purpose you can yet name. Just the way you've started to catalogue everything in this city, building a map of how things actually work underneath how they're supposed to work. The penny pie is a construction, an engineered experience. Hot pastry for the hands, steam for the nose, gravy for the mouth, salt and pepper to occupy the tongue. Everything calibrated to satisfy the particular hunger of a working person on a cold morning who has exactly 1 penny and about 4 minutes to eat something before they're late. It's almost brilliant. You have a good touch, Mr. Dent says. It's the closest thing to a compliment he's given you in 3 months. He's watching you crimp the edge of a pie with the 4-point fold you've spent weeks getting right. The crimping, you're consistent. Thank you, sir. Consistency matters. A pie that looks right sells better than a pie that tastes slightly better but looks uncertain. The customer decides before they bite. Remember that. He walks back to the barrel, lifts the lid, considers its contents. We'll need a new delivery before the weekend, he says. I'll send you back to Sharp's Friday. Yes, sir. And tell him about the bones. You keep your eyes on the pie you're crimping. Which bones? Last box had some pieces not properly trimmed. Tell him. Or don't say trimmed. Just say Dent's not satisfied with the preparation and ask him to be more thorough with the dressing. A pause. The meaning of the instruction sits in the room, quietly. Yes, sir, you say. Not everyone on the street is Mr. Dent. This is something you begin to understand around the end of your 2nd month, when the routes you walk to and from the market start to overlap with other routes, other pie operations, other basement kitchens you don't enter but whose smoke you see and whose smell you catch and whose operators you start to recognise. London has hundreds of pie men, possibly thousands if you count the irregular operators, the people who do it twice a week from a borrowed kitchen to supplement other income, the women who make a dozen pies on Monday morning and sell them door to door in their own building, the full-time operations, the commercial ones with barrows and regular pitches and regular customers, are concentrated in particular areas and particular networks. There's a man named Bridie, not his real name, no one has ever established his real name, who runs 3 pitches in Whitechapel and who is, by general market consensus, the most creative practitioner in the trade, meaning that the gap between what's in Bridie's pies and what he tells people is in his pies is wider than anyone else's. Bridie is cheerful. He has the kind of cheerfulness that sits just outside the reach of any bad news, insulated from it by a consistent and apparently genuine belief that what the customer doesn't know genuinely doesn't hurt them. You're working for Dent, he says when you encounter him at Sharp's Yard at 5 a.m. He looks at your sack, nods. Dent's thorough. I'll say that for him. Good pastry. Consistent product. He's particular about the crimping. Bridie waves a hand. Crimping. Presentation. Yes, he's old school like that. I'm more flexible. He grins. Listen, what does Dent pay for his seasonings? You tell him. He listens with the focused interest of a man who prices everything by comparison. Too much, he says. I get mine from a man on Aldgate who blends them himself. Cheaper and more effective. Effective. The word hangs there. What's in his blend? Bridie waves the question away, not unkindly. You don't need to know everything at 15. There's a woman who sells from a stall near London Bridge who does an eel pie that is genuinely what it says it is. You verified this by watching her operate and by the smell, which is distinctly and unmistakably river water and fish. She's considered in the pie trade something of an eccentric. Fresh eels, she said to you once when you expressed surprise. People can tell the difference. People buy from Bridie, you pointed out. Bridie's customers, she said, are people who can't afford to tell the difference. Which is both true and unkind and exactly the kind of thing you think about later, in the kitchen, At 2 in the morning, with your grey hands and the barrel, the range of the trade, the full spectrum from fresh eels to whatever the deep end of Bridie's supply chain is producing, and the customers distributed along that spectrum according to income, geography, habit, and the degree of attention they can afford to pay. You think about the tall man who always wants two, the woman with the red shawl who haggles for no reason, the group of boys sharing fractions. They're buying warmth, they're buying salt and fat and the sensation of having eaten. They're buying the brief feeling of sufficiency that a penny pie provides for approximately 15 minutes before the cold reasserts itself. You're providing that. Whether what you're providing it with is a separate question. In November, 6 weeks after Mr. Fossey and his notebook, 2 men come to the shop. The 2 men are from the Metropolitan Board of Health, established 3 years ago under the Public Health Act and still, in 1855, finding its feet. You don't see them directly. You hear them. The kitchen is directly below the shop floor and voices carry. One of them is doing most of the talking. His voice is precise and carries the accent of somewhere northern and educated. He's asking Mr. Dent about his supply sources, his preparation methods, his storage conditions. Mr. Dent is being cooperative. This is, you've realised, his standard technique with officialdom. Absolute surface compliance combined with a comprehensive absence of actual useful information. The stock comes from several suppliers, he says, all reputable establishments. Could you provide their names? Of course. He gives names. Some of them you recognise as legitimate. The flour supplier is real. The salt merchant is real. The other names, Sharps is not mentioned, Collins is not mentioned. The various sources of the barrel's contents are entirely absent. We'd like to inspect the preparation area, the precise voice says. A pause. Certainly, Mr. Dent says, the kitchen is available for inspection. You look at Albert. Albert looks at the oven. The barrel is in the corner. The sound of footsteps coming toward the internal door. For a moment, the world is very still, and then Mr. Dent's voice, smoothly redirecting. Though, if you're interested in production quality, perhaps the finished product would be more instructive. I have today's batch, just out of the oven. A slight pause in the footsteps. The process of preparation is what we're examining, the precise voice says, but slightly less certainly. Of course, Mr. Dent says, I should mention that we're in the middle of the second batch. The preparation area is quite active. Perhaps if you could return tomorrow morning after the first run, I could have everything laid out for a thorough inspection. And this is, you realise, the art of it. Not confrontation, not refusal. Tomorrow. Come back tomorrow. And tomorrow the barrel will have been emptied and cleaned and refilled from a different source. The problematic material will have been processed through the pies and sold and eaten and digested and gone, and what remains will be exactly what can stand an inspection. The footsteps stop. Some conversation above, too low to hear. Then the door. They'll come back tomorrow. Tomorrow there'll be nothing here that wasn't explainable. Mr. Dent comes downstairs. He goes to the barrel. He lifts the lid. Looks inside for a moment. Tom, he says, Sir, we'll process all of this tonight. Tonight? But the ovens? We'll run 3 batches. Albert, get the coal. Albert gets the coal. You stay at the table from 9 that night until 3 in the morning, working without stopping except to drink water and feed the ovens. Albert works beside you. Mr. Dent works at the table too, which he almost never does, chopping and filling and loading at a pace that reveals decades of muscle memory. By 3 in the morning, the barrel is empty, cleaned, refilled with a quantity of standard pork shoulder, visible, orthodox, the kind of meat that can explain itself. 540 pies. Tomorrow, when the Board of Health returns, there will be nothing in this kitchen that isn't exactly what it says it is. The 240 extra pies will be sold through the normal channels, 1 penny each, and someone's morning will include a piece of the thing that was in the barrel last night, already baked and sold and gone before anyone can catch it. You carry the last tray of pies up the stairs at 3:15. Your arms ache from the elbow to the shoulder. Your back is a single long complaint. Your feet have been cold since midnight. You stand in the doorway for a moment, holding the last tray, looking out. London, 3 in the morning, November, a city of 2.5 million people, all of them somewhere in the dark, sleeping or working or drinking or simply surviving until morning. Some of them will eat your pies tomorrow. The thought is neither triumphant nor quite shameful. It just is. Another fact in the accumulation of facts that makes up your working life. You take the tray back inside. In December, a newspaper publishes a piece. You wouldn't have seen it. You don't have the income for newspapers, except that a customer on Tooley Street leaves one behind, folded beside his coffee cup at the street vendor's table next to where you're standing, and when he walks away, you take it. The Times, 3rd page. A piece by a correspondent signing himself with initials only, describing the findings of recent inspections into the London meat trade, with particular reference to the pie trade. You read it standing in the doorway of a closed boot shop, pie basket on your arm, the cold getting into your fingers around the newspaper's edges. The article is careful. It uses language that is both accusatory and technically defensible, the way journalism does when it's describing things that everyone knows and that nobody has yet made illegal. It mentions the adulteration of pie filling with inferior meats of uncertain provenance. It mentions the use of condemned or diseased livestock from the metropolitan markets. It mentions the practice of adding chemical seasonings to mask the character of the ingredients. It doesn't name names, but it mentions Bermondsey. It mentions Suffolk. It describes basement kitchens as operating below the level of public visibility, beyond the reach of inspection or accountability. Below the level of public visibility. You read that phrase 3 times, below the level, 6 steps down from the alley. The window showing nothing but boot heels. The ceiling Mr. Dent has to duck under. The tallow candle that makes everything look slightly worse than it is. The article finishes with a call for legislation. Until such time as the practice of adulteration is comprehensively addressed by the legislature, the working population of this city will continue to consume, unknowingly, products whose composition would, if known, cause significant public alarm. Significant public alarm. You fold the newspaper and put it in your coat pocket. 2 more customers come, a penny each. 2 pies, warm in the basket, the steam catching in the cold December air like breath. Significant public alarm. You sell them. You take the pennies. You keep your face neutral and your manner cheerful, the way Mr. Dent taught you, because cheerfulness sells pies and anxiety doesn't. You keep the newspaper. That night, after the kitchen work, you read it again in the attic room above the shop by the light of your own tallow candle, while the city makes its night sounds below. It's the first thing you've read in 3 months that knew, from the outside, what you know from the inside. This is not a comfort, but it's something. A small evidence that what you're part of exists in the world in a form that can be described and examined, and that somewhere, someone is paying attention. Sundays the shop is closed. Mr. Dent takes Sunday seriously in the way some people take it as genuine observance, and others take it as the day the rules suspend, and which version he holds is something you've never quite determined. Either way, there is no production on Sunday, no barrel, no sharps, no crimping, no filling, no coal. You sleep until 7, which is the latest you've slept any day since arriving in London, and even 7 feels like an indulgence. Then you wash, properly, with a Spittam hard soap and the full basin of cold water. Your hands in the water turn it grey within seconds, the embedded grease of the week releasing, and you scrub until the water's too dark to use and start again. Clean hands feel strange. They feel thin somehow, too light. You go out. London on Sunday is a different noise, slower. The commerce noise is absent, and what's left is the residential noise. Children, church bells, the occasional cart doing something that doesn't officially count as trade. You walk north, not with any particular plan, just north, away from the smell of the tanneries, away from the riverside streets, toward the parts of the city that are different enough to be educational. Past London Bridge, north over the river. The Thames below you is broad and grey and busy even on Sunday, because the river doesn't observe the day of rest. Ships at anchor, lighters carrying cargo, a steamboat chugging up toward Westminster, trailing a ribbon of black smoke. You stop at the middle of the bridge and look west. The city on both banks, stretching away into the haze. St. Paul's Dome rising above everything on the northern bank. Wren's masterpiece, complete since 1710, still the highest point of the skyline in most directions. 140 feet to the top of the dome, 365 feet to the top of the cross above it. 365, like days in a year, though this is probably a coincidence that someone decided afterward was not a coincidence. The dome is white-grey in the winter light. The pigeons that live in its upper structures are circling, visible as dark points moving in slow spirals. To the east, downstream, the forest of masts at the Pool of London. Ships from everywhere, waiting to unload at the dozens of wharves along both banks. This city moves so much material, an incomprehensible quantity of goods flowing in and flowing out, and you are one tiny piece of the machinery that processes it, taking in material at one end and producing penny pies at the other, and the material at your end of the chain is not something St. Paul's Dome was built to commemorate, but it's real. It's as real as the dome. 2.5 million people need feeding, and the penny pie is one of the ways that the bottom half of them gets fed, and whatever is in the barrel is at least hot and at least filling, and at least costs only a penny. These are not justifications. You know they're not justifications. But they sit in the same mind that also holds the look on the face of the woman with the red shawl when she bites into the pie and closes her eyes for a second, just a second, in the unself-conscious pleasure of something hot on a cold morning. She doesn't know. She trusts. You know. You stand there and take the penny. This is the arrangement. You look at St. Paul's for a long time. The pigeons circle. The river moves. The ships wait. Then you walk back south. Collins arrives on Tuesday nights, at midnight with the cart. You've only seen him twice, but you've heard him the other times. The specific pattern of the cart in the alley, the creak of a certain axle, the particular quiet of a man who has learned to move through the city at midnight without drawing attention. The second time you see him, you're awake when you shouldn't be, sitting on the stairs to the kitchen because the attic room was too cold to sleep in, and the residual warmth from the ovens rises up through the stairwell. Collins is a large man, heavy through the shoulders, a face designed to be unmemorable, the kind of face that will be forgotten almost as soon as it's looked at. He and Mr. Dent speak in the quiet, rapid way of two men who have been doing the same transaction for a long time and have reduced it to its essential elements. Money, quantity. When's the next delivery? You see on the cart, in the partial illumination of the gas lamp at the alley's far end, before the canvas is pulled over, 3 or 4 burlap sacks, 2 wooden crates, and something in the corner of the cart that's neither a sack nor a crate, covered with its own piece of canvas that has the approximate shape of, you go back upstairs. You don't know what you saw. You choose not to know what you saw. This is the process. This is the continual, ongoing, daily choice of not knowing. The investment of energy in the maintenance of the peripheral vision relationship with truth. Mr. Dent comes upstairs 20 minutes later. He doesn't see you. Or he does see you in the peripheral vision way and makes the same choice. In the morning there's new delivery in the barrel. The colour is different from the Sharp's delivery. Darker, coarser grain. Mr. Dent seasons it with heavier amounts of pepper and the brown liquid, and you make the second batch pies, and they sell exactly as well as the first batch pies, because by the time the oven has done its work, the colour and the grain are academic. The gravy covers everything. The gravy, Mr. Dent says, is the art. February 1856. The newspapers are full of the adulteration question. The Society for the Inspection of Adulterated Foods has published a report. Several members of Parliament have taken up the cause. Mr. Fossey, who has appeared twice more on Tooley Street with his notebook, now has a piece published under his own name in a periodical that a customer quotes at you while waiting for change. Says here, the customer says, a regular, the kind who buys a pie every day on the way to work and has started considering himself something of an authority on pie quality. Says here that the cheap pie trade is the worst offender in the whole adulteration business, worse than the bread, worse than the milk. Does it, you say? Milk's watered, bread's got chalk in it, but pies... He pauses for dramatic effect, clearly rehearsed. Pies have things in them that a man would refuse to name in mixed company. He says this while eating his pie. You watch him eat. And here I am, he says, still chewing, still buying the things, 'cause what else are you going to do? What else are you going to do? The milk is watered, the bread has chalk, the butter is extended with tallow, the coffee is mixed with burnt grain, the tea is bulked with dried hedge leaves, the sugar is adulterated with fine sand, the beer is diluted, the gin is synthetic, the salt has things in it that aren't salt. The adulteration of food is not, in 1856, a failure of the market. It's a feature of it, an adaptation to the constraint of poverty and the premium on price, operating at every level of the supply chain, magnified down from manufacturer to distributor, to retailer to seller, until by the time it reaches the penny at the bottom of the chain, the original substance is present mainly as concept. And the people eating it know this in the peripheral way, and eat it anyway because the alternative is not eating. What else are you going to do? The man says, finishing his pie, dropping the newspaper page he'd been reading it from. He walks away. You fold the newspaper square, put it in your pocket alongside the other one. The legislation is coming. 5 years from now, the Adulteration of Food and Drink Act Act of 1860 will put some actual structure around this, create proper powers of inspection, make certain practices explicitly illegal, but that's 5 years from now. Right now, it's February 1856, and the barrel is full, and the ovens are going, and the pies are hot. In March, a thing happens. A woman comes to the front counter, not a regular customer, not the usual street corner crowd. A woman in reasonably good clothing, from a reasonably good neighbourhood, who has a specific request. She wants a pie for an invalid. Her husband, she explains, is recovering from a fever and has a fancy for a meat pie. She wants to know what's in the pie. Not in the suspicious way of an inspector, in the practical way of a woman who is responsible for a sick person's nutrition and takes that responsibility seriously. Mr. Dent looks at her for a moment. Then he says, "We have a special order batch, made with proper beef and pork for customers with particular requirements. Those are 3p each." This is the first time you've heard of the 3p pies. After the woman leaves with 2 3p pies, a 6p spent without hesitation. Mr. Dent shows you the special batch. They're in the back of the highest shelf. A separate tin. 8 pies in it, made to order when required. He opens the tin and hands you one. Eat it. You eat it, and it's a pie, an actual pie. Beef, properly seasoned with real herbs and a proper clean gravy. The pastry is the same pastry, same recipe, same ovens, but the filling is completely different. It's what the penny pie is pretending to be. The contrast sits in your mouth while you chew. The absence of the chemical sharpness you've gotten so used to that you stop noticing it. The actual flavour of actual meat. The way the gravy tastes like something that was cooked rather than assembled. You eat it in the kitchen, standing at the preparation table, and you don't say anything. Mr. Dent watches you eat it. "Good," he says. It's not a question. "Good," you agree. He takes the tin back, returns it to the shelf. 3p pies are for people who ask specific questions, he says. Penny pies are for people who don't. This is not a moral framework, it's a business model. "Sir," you say, "do you know? The penny customers, do they ever get sick?" A long pause. Mr. Dent looks at you with an expression that contains several things simultaneously. An assessment, a decision, something underneath that you can't quite name. No more than anyone else in this city, he says, no more than the people drinking the water. This is true. The people eating penny pies in Southwark in 1856 are also drinking the water from the Thames, which has not yet had the great stink that will finally, in 1858, force Parliament to act on the sewage question. The cholera that killed 10,000 people in 1853 is still in living memory. The penny pie in this context is not the most dangerous thing your customers consume. This is also not a moral framework. It's just a fact. Back to work, Mr. Dent says. On a Sunday in April you walk further north than you've been before, past St. Paul's, which you've seen from the bridge but never approached this closely, up into the city proper, the square mile, the old walled city, the streets that have been streets since the Romans, and then north and east, following the current of Sunday walkers toward Clerkenwell, toward Islington, toward the edges of where the city stops being city and becomes something more ambiguous. At the top of Pentonville Road there's a rise, not dramatic, not a hill in any sense that someone from Shropshire would call a hill. Just a slight elevation where the land is a few feet higher than the streets below it, enough to see over the nearest rooftops. You stop there. Below you, and to the south and east and west, London. The scale of it. You've been in it for 6 months. You've been in Bermondsey and Southwark and Newgate and the City and Whitechapel, covering significant ground in your daily routes. But seeing it from here, even from this modest height, is different from being inside it. It goes on. The rooftops go on in every direction until the smoke and the haze swallow them at distance. The particular colour of London in April, grey touched with brown, touched with the beginning of green where the parks and the garden squares push their first growth through. Thousands of chimneys, hundreds of church spires, the dome of St. Paul's to the south lower than you'd have expected, the city having grown up around it. The river's bend, visible as a change in the quality of the light where the water reflects the sky. 2.5 million people, somewhere in that, all of them eating, all of them making the daily calculations about what they can afford and what they're willing to ask about, and the penny pie sits in that calculation somewhere. A small daily fact, a hot, reliable thing on a cold morning that costs only what it costs and asks for nothing from you except the penny. You think about the woman with the red shawl, the boys sharing fractions, the tall man who always wants 2, Mr. Fossey with his notebook, the Board of Health men who came back the day after the emergency processing and found nothing remarkable, the newspaper in your coat pocket, the piece of meat from the sharp's box, the small bones, the fine grain, the 3-penny pie. What a real pie tastes like. The art of the gravy. You could leave. This occurs to you for the first time standing on the low rise above Pentonville Road, looking south at the smoke and the rooftops. You could leave Mr. Dent's employ. You're not legally an apprentice. That's a formal arrangement with documents and fees that Mr. Dent never made formal, either by oversight or intention. You work by a handshake agreement at 3 shillings a week, which can be dissolved by either party on Sunday notice. You could leave. Find something else. The city has other work. The reason you don't, and the reason you won't, at least not yet, is the 3 shillings a week, which sounds like very little, and is, but is more than nothing, which is what you had in the autumn. And the thing you don't like to acknowledge directly, you know how to do this now. The crimping and the pastry and the oven temperatures and the negotiation with Jessie at Sharp's. You know this specific skill, and changing employment means learning a new one from the beginning, and beginning costs money you don't currently have. This is the trap. Not a dramatic trap, not bars and locks, just the ordinary economic trap of having invested time in learning something that only pays inside the thing you want to leave. The city taught you that too, alongside the chemistry of deception and the taxonomy of dead meat. The fog to the south shifts. The dome of St. Paul's comes clearer for a moment, the pigeons circling in the distance. 6 months ago you came here with 17 shillings and a letter that led nowhere. London was overwhelming, terrifying, too big to comprehend. Now you know things. You know which streets to avoid at night. You know how to negotiate with Jessie at Sharp's. You know the smell of the river at low tide and the sound of the ovens at 2 in the morning, and the specific creak of the 4th stair, and the 4-point crimp, and the art of the gravy. You're becoming something. Whether that something is better or just different is a question that might take the rest of your life to answer. The spring air up here is cleaner than it is in Bermondsey. Slightly. A relative improvement. Still London air, still carrying its permanent composite of industrial smoke and animal waste, and 500,000 cooking fires. But the particular chemical edge of the tanneries is absent, and there's something green underneath. something that remembers that England existed before the city expanded over it. You breathe in, then you turn around and walk back south. In May, you read the full text of Mr. Foss's report, published as a pamphlet. You buy it from a street vendor near London Bridge for twopence. It's 20 pages, closely printed, with a scientific precision that suggests a man who's been building a case carefully and is now presenting it. The chemistry section is specific. Analysis of samples taken from 12 establishments across Southwark and Bermondsey, with the results described in terms you have to work to follow but can mostly understand. Sample A, described as beef, contains principally equine tissue with traces of feline matter. Adulterants include bread meal, dried capsicum, salt, and a preparation sold commercially as meat flavour extract, which, on analysis, contains minimal actual meat. Sample B, described as mixed meat, contains bovine tissue, condemned or diseased grade, equine tissue, canine tissue, and an unidentified fourth component, heavily adulterated with dried starch compound. You read it on the riverside embankment, sitting on a stone step above the mud. The river is low and smells of itself. Sample B is probably Mr. Dent's product, or something very close to it. The description matches what you know. Canine tissue. That's the word for what you've been crimping into pastry every morning for 6 months. The word doesn't add anything to what you already knew in the peripheral way. But seeing it in a printed document, in black and white, with the authority of a scientific analysis, is different from the peripheral knowledge. The peripheral knowledge lives in the unexamined space. The printed word is different. The printed word says this is confirmed, this is on the record. 2 days later, you go to Mr. Dent before the morning shift starts. You put the pamphlet on the preparation table. He looks at it, then at you. "I know about this," he says. "Sir?" "Fosse, the society. I've been aware of their activities." A pause. "And," you say, "you've never quite said and to Mr. Dent before." He's quiet for a long moment. The ovens are already going. The warmth builds from the walls. "Tom," he says, "how many pie shops do you think are operating in this city?" "I don't know. Hundreds." "Closer to 400 with fixed premises. Twice that with mobile sellers. Fosse's report names no individual shop. He has his 12 samples with letters. The authorities don't have the resources to chase all of them. And even if they did," he pauses, "even if they did, the law as currently written doesn't clearly prohibit what we do." He picks up the pamphlet, studies the cover. "The law is changing," he says. "I've known this for 2 years. By 1860 or so, there will be an Adulteration Act that means something. I'm adapting." Adapting? The 3-penny pies. I'm increasing that line. And I've been in conversation with a proper butcher in Newgate Street about supply arrangement. Cheaper than retail, but above the market I've been using. He sets the pamphlet down. "I'm not going to pretend to you," he says, which is the most direct thing he's said to you in 6 months, "that everything in this kitchen has been above question. It hasn't. The trade I've been in operates at margins that make question avoidance necessary." You say nothing. "But I'm also telling you that I'm changing it. Not because Fosse published a pamphlet, because I've seen the direction, and I'm not going to be in the wrong position when the act passes." He hands you the pamphlet back. "If that's not satisfactory to you, I understand." A long pause. The warmth from the ovens, the smell of the kitchen, cycling back and forth between something you've stopped noticing and something you can't stop noticing. "It's satisfactory," you say. He nods once. "Back to work." Summer in Bermondsey smells different from winter in Bermondsey. In winter, the smell is concentrated. Cold air holds less than warm air, and so what you get is the tanneries, the factory smoke, the river at low tide, compressed and dense but relatively consistent. In summer, the smell explodes. The Thames in summer 1856 is at the beginning of what will become, in 1858, the Great Stink, the catastrophic failure of the sewage system that will finally embarrass Parliament into action. Right now, in 1856, is not yet a crisis, but it's an indication. The river is receiving every day the output of 2.5 million people, along with the runoff from 100 industries, and in warm weather, the smell reaches into the streets in a way that's difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't stood on the Suffolk bank in July. You learn to smell it without reacting. This takes about 3 weeks. The kitchen in summer is different too. The oven room reaches temperatures in July and August that make the word hot feel inadequate. You work in your shirt sleeves. Albert works in his shirt sleeves. Mr. Dent works in his shirt sleeves, which reveals arms that are an entire historical record of small burns and knife cuts, the map of a life spent near fire and sharp edges. You accumulate your own small marks, the burn on your right forearm from where the oven door caught you in May, the cut on the left index finger from the chopping block that took 2 weeks to fully close, the permanent roughness of your palms that no amount of soap has addressed since winter. Your hands are no longer the hands you arrived with. They're something else now. Working hands. Hands that know what they're doing. There are mornings, more frequently as the summer goes on, when you stand at the preparation table and work for an hour before you're fully awake, the hands moving in their practiced pattern, the body on its own recognizance while the mind is still catching up. This is what competence feels like on the inside. Not mastery or pride, just the hands knowing and the mind allowed to wander. Mr. Dent has been incrementally making changes. The supply from Collins has stopped. Abruptly, one Tuesday, no explanation. The Sharps' visits continue, but with different stock. Pork, primarily, some horse still, but the more questionable category is no longer present in the barrel. You notice the smell in the kitchen changing, very slowly, towards something more identifiable. The pies taste different, not dramatically, marginally, but you notice. A regular customer on Tooley Street, the one who reads newspapers at you, says, "These are better lately. What did you change?" "Same recipe," you say. "Something's different." "The summer," you say. "The flour's different in summer." He looks at you for a moment with the expression of a man who suspects he's being managed and who is insufficiently interested in the truth to push the point. "Fair enough," he says, and walks away eating his pie. In September, Albert says something. Not a full sentence this time. More than 8 words. You're at the end of the first shift, washing your hands at the basin, the water going grey in the usual way, and Albert is beside you doing the same, and out of nowhere, without looking up from the basin, he says, "My brother got sick." You look at him. He's still looking at his hands in the water. "From what?" you say. "Pie, bought from a street man near Borough Market. Month ago. Took to his bed for 2 weeks." A pause. The grey water, both of you washing. "He's better now," Albert says, "but he was bad for a while." "From what we make?" you ask. You don't mean to ask this. It comes out anyway. Albert looks up then. Looks at you directly, which is unusual. "Don't know whose," he says. "Borough Market's not our pitch." A pause. But could have been ours, you say. Albert is quiet for a moment. Could have been anyone's, he says. He goes back to washing his hands. You go back to washing yours. This is the conversation you have. Neither of you takes it further. Neither of you knows what taking it further would mean, or where further goes, or whether further is even available to two boys in a Bermondsey kitchen in 1856 who between them earn 4 shillings a week and have nowhere else to be. But you remember Albert's face when he looked at you, the directness of it, the small act of recognition, that you know, that he knows, that the knowing is shared. That's not nothing. That's not nothing at all. November 1856. 13 months since you arrived. Mr. Dent gives you a raise, 4 shillings a week. He announces it without ceremony during the evening count while looking at his ledger. 4 shillings as of Monday, he says. Thank you, sir. You've earned it. Your negotiating at the markets has been good, and the morning route times have improved. This is the most thorough compliment he's given you in a year. You go upstairs and sit in the attic room, which is cold in November the same way it was cold last November, and look at the ceiling and think about what 13 months in this city has made of you. The hands, rougher, marked. They know things. The mind, different. You've learned to hold information in the peripheral way, not to deny it exactly, but to manage its prominence in your thinking. You've learned to negotiate, to read a room, to calculate silently, to sell a thing while thinking about something else. The moral ledger, complicated. You've been part of something that the newspaper calls a public health concern. You've chopped the contents of the barrel for 13 months, knowing what the barrel probably contained, and sold the results to people who trusted you. You've also watched Mr. Dent begin, slowly, to change the thing, not from principle, from calculation, from legislative direction, from the closing of the information asymmetry. But the change is real. The pies are better. Not what a person with money would choose, but better than they were. Is that enough? You don't know. You're 16. You're 4 shillings a week richer than you were, and the knowledge you carry is sitting in the peripheral space where you've put it, and the city outside is continuing its enormous grinding work of processing and consuming and producing and moving on. Tomorrow there will be the barrel to check, and the ovens to light, and the morning route to Sharp's, and the basket on Tooley Street, and the same faces with the same pennies, the same as yesterday, the same as 13 months of days stretching back to the beginning, but not quite the same. Something in the barrel is different. Something in you is different. The evening ritual of the kitchen, cleaning the preparation table, cleaning the pots, storing the remaining pastry materials, checking the coal supply, banking the ovens for the night. Mr. Dent counts the day's takings at the counter in the shop. 211 pies today, 211 pennies, 17 shillings and 7 pence. From that, cost of materials, decreasing as the supply chain improves, coal, your wage, Albert's wage, rent on the premises, Mr. Dent's own requirement for profit. The margin on a penny pie is very small. The volume is the whole point. The new penny pies, the pork and horse pies that still aren't quite what any butcher would call premium but are significantly above what they were, have a lower margin. Mr. Dent is absorbing this, compensating by increasing volume slightly, selling more at the 3-penny level. It's a business adapting, slowly, under the pressure of incoming legislation and shifting public awareness. Not a reformation, not a conversion, a calculation, based on the direction of travel and the cost of being caught on the wrong side of a new law. You watch this without comment. Learn from it. Because here is what 6 months in Ezekiah Dent's kitchen has taught you, beyond the chemistry of seasoning and the anatomy of the things in the barrel. The food system runs on information asymmetry. The seller knows what the buyer doesn't. The buyer trusts because they have to, because verifying is expensive and slow, and most people don't have the time. The system works, such as it works, on the collective fiction of honesty, maintained sufficiently that people keep buying and eating and not investigating. The information asymmetry is closing. Fosse's pamphlet is part of it. The newspaper articles are part of it. The Board of Health is part of it. The incoming legislation is the formal acknowledgement that the fiction has become untenable. But right now, in the autumn of 1856, the barrel has changed, and the pies are marginally better, and nobody on Tooley Street knows why, because nobody on Tooley Street knows what the pies were before. They eat them, they're warm, they cost a penny. What else are you going to do? Let me tell you what you know by the time spring 1857 comes around. You know that the food supply of the largest city in the world is, at its lower end, not what it's presented as. Not in pies specifically, in everything. You know that this isn't simple malice. It's the result of a system in which the people who need to eat the most have the least to spend, and the people who produce what they eat operate on margins that make honesty expensive. The chain of compromises runs from the farm to the broker, to the wholesaler, to the shop, to you on the corner, to the penny in the customer's hand. You know that knowledge and action are not the same thing, that knowing something is wrong and having the power to change it are separated by a gap that is sometimes small and sometimes as wide as a city. You know that change, when it comes from outside the system as often as from inside. Fosse's pamphlets, the Board of Health, the newspaper, the legislation 5 years out. These are pressure from outside the market, from people who are not operating on the penny pie margin and can therefore afford to ask questions. You know the chemistry of deception, salt and pepper and brown liquid, the art of the gravy, the way heat transforms the question of what something is into the question of whether it tastes good. You know it because you've practiced it, and you know it because you felt its absence in the brief moment when you ate a threepenny pie and your mouth recognized the difference between the real thing and the careful simulation. You know your hands, the specific rough texture of them at the end of a working day, the way they carry the smell even after washing, the weight of the rolling pin in the right hand, the rhythm of the crimping 4 points consistent. The thing Mr. Dent said made the difference. You know, Albert, the way you know people you spend 8 hours a day beside without talking much. The specific way he moves to the ovens when something needs to not be looked at. The one time he looked directly at you and said his brother was sick. You know Mr. Dent better than you want to and less well than you think. His pride in the gravy, his calculation in the face of legislation. The way he said you've earned it and meant it, in the particular way a man means it who doesn't say it lightly. You know the corner of Tooley Street in every light, every weather, every hour of the day you've stood on it. And you know what it costs to be the person who knows and sells anyway. Not a great price. A small, daily, manageable price. A penny's worth of looking away, multiplied across the transactions of a working week. You're learning to live with this. Everyone in this city is learning to live with some version of it. The attic room, November again, the cold returning, the The street sounds come up muffled through the walls, the distant clatter of a late cart, the irregular footstep of the night watchman, the faraway bell of a church marking the half-hour past 10. You've washed, eaten, done the evening work, cleaned the table. Your hands on the blanket are rough and pale in the low light. The left one shows the scar from the knife cut in May. Just a thin line now, nearly faded. Your back knows what it thinks about the day. Tomorrow is Wednesday, sharps on Friday, standard morning route Monday and Tuesday. The basket on the corner, the woman with the red shawl, comes on Thursdays and Tuesdays. Tomorrow she won't come, and you'll sell slightly fewer pies in the morning and slightly more in the afternoon, and the count will come to roughly the same number it always does because the street has a rhythm and the rhythm doesn't change much. Albert will be up before you in the morning. He's always up before you. He seems to emerge already in motion, already at the ovens, already working, as though sleep is simply a maintenance interval and he doesn't waste time on the transition. You think about Albert's brother, sick for 2 weeks, better now, better now. You think about the newspaper in your coat pocket, Fossey's pamphlet, the printed words, sample B, the barrel, now changed, mostly what it says it is. The changes made by someone who calculated rather than felt them, but changes nonetheless. Outside, London continues. This is the thing about London that you've learned more than anything else in 16 months. It doesn't stop. It has no night mode, no proper silence. The taverns near Bermondsey Bridge are still serving at 11, the noise of them just barely reaching this street. The river is moving. Ships at anchor are moving slightly with the tide. The tide itself is doing what the tide does, pulling back, exposing the mudflats, the foreshore, the centuries of accumulated deposits that the mudlarks will work in the early morning, finding coins and bones and things that fell off ships 100 years ago. The city produces so much. Manufactures and trades and consumes and processes and produces waste and absorbs waste and produces again. It contains everything. The best surgeons in the world and the conditions that make surgery necessary. The most sophisticated banking system on earth. And the rookeries where people live 6 to a room without light. Wren's Dome and the basement on Skinner's Lane. The 3-penny pie and the penny pie. The gap between them, 1 table wide, 1 penny apart, as wide as the city and as narrow as a question. You could be angry about this. Sometimes you are. But right now you're tired, and the attic is cold, and the warmth from the ovens is just barely reaching the floorboards, and the church bell somewhere to the north is marking another quarter-hour gone. Time moves in this city, more than anywhere you've been. In Shropshire, time is seasonal. You count by harvest and planting and the turning of the year. In London, time is hourly, quarter-hourly. The bells mark it continuously, from before you wake to after you sleep, the city tracking its own passage with a precision that feels almost anxious, as if it knows it has a lot to do and not enough time to do it. Your eyes are getting heavy. This is the good kind of heavy. The kind that comes from having spent the day's energy honestly, on work, on walking, on the 1,000 small decisions and physical acts of a working day. Not the bad kind. The anxious heavy that pushes against sleep rather than inviting it. Just tired. Just the natural tiredness of a body that's been useful. Your feet have warmed up. The crack in the left boot is still there. You've been meaning to address it for 6 weeks, which is now 6 weeks plus, however many weeks you thought that before. Eventually you'll deal with it. Or you won't, and your feet will be wet, and eventually you'll buy new boots. The city does this to things, defers the minor repairs until the minor becomes the major. The infrastructure of a life maintained at minimum viable level until something gives, or until something changes. The barrel changed, the pies changed. 4 shillings a week instead of 3. Small increments. The direction matters more than the speed. The sounds of the street are getting quieter, or maybe that's just you. The thing about a working day in this city is that it claims all of you, completely. There is no capacity left at the end of it for the kind of sustained thinking that feels like thinking. There's only the review. The day's events running briefly through, not examined, just confirmed and then released. The man who always wants 2. 53 pies by 9, fast morning. The Sharps negotiation. Friday, the new arrangement holding. Albert, the basin, his brother was sick. The newspaper folded in your coat. The cold stairs. The warmth rising. Mr. Dent counting the coins. 217 today. Good number. These thoughts are not conclusions, they're just inventory. The mind doing its end-of-day account, checking that everything that happened today is recorded somewhere before the record closes for the night. All noted, all accounted for, all still there tomorrow. You are 16 years old, in November, in London, in 1856, in an attic room above a pie shop on Skinner's Lane in Bermondsey. You know things that are not comfortable to know. You've been paid 4 shillings a week to know them, and to keep knowing them, and to stand on a corner with a basket and smile. You're not the worst version of this. You're not Mr. Dent, who ran the barrel for 30 years. You're not Collins, doing what Collins does in the dark. You're not even Bridie, with his creative interpretation of the customer's reasonable expectations. You're a boy who came here with 17 shillings and a letter that led nowhere, who found a kitchen that would take him, who spent 16 months learning the difference between what something is and what it's sold as. You're learning, still learning. The kind of learning that takes a whole life and doesn't resolve into a clean lesson. The world is full of penny pies, full of the distance between the front of things and what's inside them, full of the gap between the hot pastry smell and the contents, full of brown liquid in small bottles that makes things taste like what they're not, and full of people like Fosse, building their case, writing their pamphlets, narrowing the gap, full of legislation coming 5 years out, full of changes that happen slowly and then all at once. You're not the villain of this story. You're not the hero either. You're something more ordinary and more difficult than either. You're a person who is inside the thing, learning the thing, with insufficient options to easily get out of the thing, trying to be the version of the person inside the thing that does the least harm and keeps the most dignity, and pays attention to what's changing. This is also, as far as you can tell, what being a person at the bottom of a city, at the bottom of an economy looks like, when you're honest about it. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, or close enough to it. You have a skill, and you have a wage, and you have 16 months of knowing how this city works in one specific and useful and morally complicated way. That's more than 17 shillings and a letter to nowhere. That's more than a lot of people have. The cold in the attic is the same cold it always is, not dramatic, not the kind of cold that demands action. Just the persistent, patient cold of a building that doesn't retain heat well, and a thin blanket and the residual warmth of the day wearing off. You pull the blanket higher, the city is getting quieter. Not silent, never silent, but quieter. The taverns winding down, the last carts finding their destinations. the night watchman's step, regular and solitary, marking the street in front of the building. Albert breathing in the darkness, you breathing. The ovens banking to coals 3 floors below, the warmth still working its way up through the building, less than it was an hour ago. Somewhere on the river a ship's bell, the tide turning, the city adjusting. Tomorrow at 5 the ovens need feeding, tomorrow at 6 the first batch, tomorrow at 7 Tooley Street the basket, the regular faces, the pennies. Tomorrow there will be another barrel to manage and another set of questions not asked, and another 100 feet of distance between the front of things and the inside. But there will also be Albert at the basin saying something. There will be Mr. Dent counting honestly, making his calculation toward the direction things are going. There will be the woman with the red shawl who will haggle and buy and close her eyes for that half-second of warmth. There will be the day, just the day, same as always, different from yesterday in ways too small to name and too real to miss. Centuries will pass. The Bermondsey you know will change completely. Skinner's Lane will be widened, renamed, absorbed into something unrecognisable. The tanneries will close. The smell that is as permanent as the river will be gone, replaced by something cleaner and more expensive. The penny pie will evolve. The Food Standards Agency will be established. Inspectors with more authority than Mr. Fossey and more resources than the 1856 Society will regulate what goes into every pie sold in this country. The barrel on the corner will be replaced by refrigerated supply chains and ingredient declarations printed on packaging, and everything listed by law. The information asymmetry will narrow, not close, never close completely, but narrow. The gap between the front of things and what's inside them is a permanent feature of human commerce. It has been there since the first market, and it will be there after the last one. The legislation creates minimums, not honesty. The inspection creates accountability, not transparency. But the gap is smaller. The penny pie got better, not because the people making it decided to be good, because the people writing the pamphlets and passing the acts and running the tests made the cost of dishonesty higher than the cost of honesty. This is how it works. The human heart doesn't change. The incentive structure changes, but the pie got better. That's worth something. You're asleep now. The basement kitchen is silent below you. The barrel contains what it contains. The morning will come when it comes. The city continues. Somewhere in that city right now, a night baker is pulling bread from ovens. A milk cart is starting its round. A costermonger is loading his barrow for the morning, all of it running in the dark, all of it producing tomorrow's breakfast. The great engine of the city, never stopping, grinding out its daily miracle of feeding 2.5 million people who mostly don't ask too many questions and who mostly get through the day and sleep and start again. You're part of that. One small necessary part of that, with your 4 shillings and your rough hands and your grey water at the basin, the crimping consistent, the gravy not setting until it's past the teeth, the penny pie and the penny and the hand that takes it. Let sleep take you the way it takes all the other 16-year-olds in this city tonight. The ones sleeping 6 to a room, the ones sleeping in the workhouse, the ones sleeping in something considerably better in houses that have fireplaces in the bedrooms and hot water in the morning, and food whose ingredients nobody questions. All of them going under into the same darkness, where the distinctions don't operate. Let the sounds of the city fade, the watchman's step, the distant bell. the slight creak of the building in the night wind. Let the thought of tomorrow wait until tomorrow. Let the barrel and the basket and the brownish liquid and the newspaper and the pamphlet and the inspector and the act that's coming all wait. Let your hands rest. They've been working since 10 last night. They've earned it. Let the knowledge sit quietly where you've put it. It will still be there in the morning. The morning always brings it back. But not yet. Not now. For now, just the attic and the cold and Albert breathing, and the warmth from the ovens coming up through the floor like a small assurance that the building is still here, still working, still running at its ordinary temperature. For now, that's enough. Warm enough, safe enough, here enough. Let it all go. Let sleep do what sleep does. Let tomorrow be tomorrow. Good night.